This is episode 133 of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is now available on our very own digital app. This app works on your tablet, phone, or TV and lets you explore the history of William Shakespeare with exclusive content, interviews, and documentaries not available anywhere else. You can cook, dance, and play your way through the life of William Shakespeare, all without any commercials. Find out more at castycash.com/experience and stay tuned after the episode for even more details.
Hi, I'm Lynn Tribble at the University of Connecticut. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
That must have been a real shock for the audience. It's that plot twist at the end, because Monmouth's work it was very widely circulated and well known, and there was already earlier plays about King Lear, at least one earlier play that has the happy ending in it. So anyone familiar with the King Lear version going to see Shakespeare's version would have been really surprised by the ending.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Shakespeare's play King Lear is based upon the story of the ancient British king who founded Leicester in England, written by Geoffrey Monmouth. Monmouth based his story on real elements of Leicester's history, including the Jewry Wall and ancient Roman tombs, some of which are still there in Leicester today. For the 16th century, this story was already hugely popular when Shakespeare decided to adapt it for his play version. The story was so tied up with the city of Leicester specifically that historians believe the visit of the king's men to Leicester in 1606 was specifically done to perform King Lear, which had been written that same year. While the framework of Shakespeare's version does seem to follow Monmouth's footsteps, there are specific elements in Shakespeare's version which are strikingly similar to actual court cases in 17th century England, making King Lear an example of slices of cultural history which were going on right when Shakespeare was presenting this play. There were real court cases being heard in 1605 to 1606 in England involving men accused of madness by their daughters. And the names of these daughters in the court cases are just a few letters off from the name Cordelia, which Shakespeare named as one of Lear's daughters in his play. Details like these are tantalizing to explore and hard to sort out between the truth and the fiction. So we've invited our guest this week, Mathew Morris, who knows the archaeological history of Leicester best, to help us sort out the real history from the legend of King Lear. Mathew has worked for University of Leicester Archaeological Services since 2004, excavating a wide range of rural and urban archaeology across the Midlands from the prehistoric period through to the Industrial Revolution. He graduated from the University of Leicester in 2003 with a BA in archaeology and an MA in landscape studies. His interests include urban archaeology, community archaeology, and Roman and medieval archaeology. Notable projects include the High Cross Leicester retail development, a massive multi-period urban excavation investigating the northeast quarter of the Roman and medieval town, the Western Road Roman Cemetery in Leicester, work on Leicester and Oakham castles, and the Leicester Greyfriars, and the first excavated section of the Lower Inknield Way at Aston Clinton in Buckinghamshire. In 2012, he supervised the successful archaeological search for the lost grave of King Richard III. He has co-authored 3 popular books on Leicestershire archaeology: Visions of Ancient Leicester, Richard III, The King Under the Car Park, and Life in the Roman World, Roman Leicester. Mathew is a repeat guest here on the show. He was also here for episode 123, and you can go back to castycash.com/episode 123 to hear him speak with us about King Richard III. Find links to his previous episodes and more about Mathew in the show notes for today's episode. Hello, Mathew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Not many people know that Shakespeare's King Lear is actually based on a historical figure. Was the real King Lear an actual person, or is this an early British legend?
Yeah, and he's a character that's intimately linked with Leicester as well. In fact, people in Leicester, we like to claim that Shakespeare got the idea for the play whilst performing in Leicester with the King's Men. That's probably a little apocryphal. We do know the King's Men visited Leicester. We know they were in Leicester in 1606, but that's the year King Lear was published, so it's more likely they came to Leicester to perform it rather than actually got the idea, Shakespeare getting the idea here. But what we know is that his story first appears in the 12th century, and it's written down by a man called Geoffrey Monmouth, who was a chronicler during that period, in a pseudo-historical work called The History of the Kings of Britain. And Monmouth claims that King Lear is the 10th king of Britain, ruling for around 60 years in the late 9th and early 8th century BC, so what we would call the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age today. Unfortunately, whilst Monmouth calls on lots of earlier sources of work, written sources that still survive today, as well as a lot of oral sources and folklore traditions, particularly Welsh folklore traditions, none of them mention King Lear. So it seems more likely that he is a character of Monmouth's own creation, unfortunately. So legendary, not real.
Oh, well, that's disappointing. But despite Monmouth's version being fictional, archaeological evidence does prove that some of the King Lear story has an element of truth. Matthew, what archaeological evidence is there to support the founding of Leicester?
So Monmouth tells us specifically that King Lear founded a city on the banks of the River Soar called Leir, or Leicester. And there is some archaeological evidence to support Leicester's foundation, of course. On the assumption that King Lear is a completely fictional character, we have to consider it carefully. So we know from archaeological evidence that first permanent settlement at Leicester started in around about the 1st century BC, so about 700 years after Monmouth claimed Lear founded the city. And we know from Roman sources that it wasn't called Leir either, it was called Ratae, which is a Celtic word that means ramparts. However, Monmouth is correct when he alludes to Leicester being an ancient royal centre. So the city's archaeology shows that Iron Age Leicester had trade links across Britain and continental Europe as far south as the Mediterranean, and that they were also minting coins in the city in the Iron Age. And a coin mint is a good sign of it being a royal site. And we believe from Roman sources that Leicester was a capital of the people that the Romans called the Corioltavi, which was the sort of a loose confederation of peoples that lived in the English East Midlands during the late Iron Age, around about the time just shortly before the Romans arrived. And so Leicester is probably one of the capitals of this tribal group. And certainly Leicester was important enough for the Romans to designate it what they call a civitas. It's the regional administrative centre for the Corioltavi. And it becomes Ratae Corioltavorum in the Latin name for it. So yes, there's a part truth or an echo of truth, perhaps, in Monmouth's story that Leicester was a royal Iron Age city.
I think Shakespeare borrows some of these legends mixed with truth for his plays, and I want to explore some of that history because even though we can say King Lear himself was likely a made-up figure, some of the people in the play have historical basis. So let's talk about some of these legends. Did Cordelia bury her father in a vault beneath the River Soar? I mean, that's an actual river where the real city is. So some of this is intermingling.
Yeah, and it's a very specific reference as well, which is intriguing. So I guess perhaps to start off with, I should explain the differences between Monmouth's story and Shakespeare's version. So in Shakespeare's retelling this much older story, and he does make some changes. And the big key difference here is that in the original version of it, King Lear has a happy ending. So the story's pretty much the same. King Lear is growing elderly. He decides to split his kingdom between his 3 daughters, as Shakespeare describes, and that the youngest, Cordelia, sort of refuses to flatter the king, and therefore he rejects her and casts her out. The older daughters then, of course, seize control, and King Lear is forced to flee penniless to France, where he reunites with Cordelia. But unlike Shakespeare's version, the Cordelia and her husband lead an invasion of England and successfully defeat her sisters, and King Lear is able to reclaim his throne, and he rules for another 2 years before he dies peacefully. And Cordelia outlives him and succeeds her father as Queen of Britain. And so this is where this bit of story then comes in. So allegedly, she buries her father in a vault beneath the River Soar at Leicester. And that vault is dedicated to the Roman god Janus. And this is a very specific detail in this story, almost too detailed to be a complete fabrication. And what we actually think is going on here, so sort of ignore Cordelia for the moment, but the reference to this vault dedicated to Janus, we think Monmouth is showing some familiarity with Leicester here, and he's trying to rationalise relic Roman ruins still within the medieval townscape and explain them to his audience or justify why they're still there. And he's talking about one in particular, we think, and it still survives today. It's one of the largest bits of Roman masonry still surviving in Britain. And we call it the Jewry Wall today. It's got nothing to do with a Jewish quarter. We think it comes from the word jury, as in courts, a jurat. But in the medieval period and in Shakespeare's time, it was much more commonly known as the Temple of Janus. So there's this direct link between this Roman ruin in Leicester today and Monmouth's Lear legend and this how Lear was buried in this vault. So again, an element of truth within the fabric of the sort of the fabrications.
So taking a piece that's real and building a story around it.
Absolutely.
Now, in Shakespeare's King Lear, the title character wanders over a heath in a storm, while Gloucester blindly wanders over that same heath, later being banished. Matthew, please explain for those of us who may be unfamiliar, what exactly is a heath? And then tell us whether or not this is actually a feature of the area there in Leicester. Was Shakespeare being true to the historical location or making that up as well?
Okay, so yeah, a heath. So a heath would be referencing in sort of how Shakespeare's describing it. A heath would be referencing something that's sort of effectively, it's a well-drained, uncultivated shrubland, I guess is the best way of calling it. In England, we would use it in reference to low-lying areas that were typically not suitable for cultivation, but were important for common grazing. If it was an upland area, we would probably call it moorland. So they're sort of the same thing, different words for the same thing. If it's low-lying, it's heathland, effectively.
So when you read literature and they talk about across the moor, this is what they're talking about?
Effectively, but probably don't think on top of hills, think in the valley bottoms, if it's describing it as heathland. So.
I see. Okay. So lots of mysterious things could go on here. And
yeah.
Is that true to what Leicester looks like? I mean, if... a lot of us haven't been there. So is that...
Well, not today, obviously, but it's certainly true to how areas of Leicestershire could have looked like in the medieval period and during Shakespeare's time and Monmouth's time as well. So, I mean, it's worth pointing out that neither Shakespeare nor Monmouth actually set King Lear's events in Leicester. And in the staging, of course, the heath is next to Gloucester's
Which is
castle.
what I was driving at, really, I think, was did he even put it there, or was it somewhere?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, for the very least, Shakespeare never mentions Leicester, much to our disgust. So,
sorry about that.
But it's very typical British landscape. And certainly around Leicester, specifically on the high ground north of Leicester, you've got this area of extensive forest. So it's called Leicester Forest, and then beyond it is the Great Charnwood, these sort of relic ancient medieval woodlands. And when we use the word forest in a medieval context, we're not talking about an area of dense woodland. We're talking about a specific legal designation. A forest is describing an area that is specifically set aside for certain activities, such as hunting. And so it doesn't have to be all woodland. It can be a mixture of woodland, heath, pasture, and so forth. So actually, the setting of the play is very relevant to Leicester's landscape during Shakespeare's period. I mean, it would certainly work being set in and around Leicester. It's just, unfortunately, he never makes any reference. And I thought you sort of actually allude to it probably taking place in southwest Britain because of references to Cornwall and Gloucester and so forth.
Now, Monmouth's version of King Lear and the founding of Leicester is considered a source for William Shakespeare. So let's look at where Monmouth got his information. Matthew, did Monmouth research the actual Leicester to put together his version? I mean, did he go there, or he's using these pieces that are real pieces, but where did he put this all together from? What you mentioned, the folklore sources earlier as an example.
Yeah, so we've already sort of talked about the Jewry Wall and this relic Roman structure that would have had to have had local knowledge to have known that, I think. Unfortunately, we really don't know much about Monmouth's adult life, what he did. So he was a cleric of some sort. He was certainly linked with the church, and in later life he was a bishop. He seems to have had a link with Oxford. He may have been a teaching there as well. But when you read his entire book, it's full of very specific topographic references that suggest he must have been quite widely travelled or relied on people that had local knowledge at the very least. And yeah, so you look at his topographical knowledge of Leicester, the fact that he knows the river's name, he knows about the sort of the Roman ruins in the town and so forth, does suggest he has quite a lot of familiarity with the town. He also talks about an annual festival to King Lear taking place in the town as well. So he's got knowledge of local customs as well, potentially. Where he gets the King Lear legend from, though, exactly is unclear. Or one argument is that Lear of Leicester is a sort of a Celtic mythological hangover linked with the Irish sea god Lear. And so there is perhaps it's some local tradition of a local river god, that Lear was perhaps the original name for the river Soar, and also linked up with Celtic mythology. Unfortunately, the word Lear seems to have been entirely post-Roman in its usage. So it's so Anglo-Saxon. So it doesn't seem likely that it was actually a Celtic British hangover. And also we do know that Leicester was still using its Roman name into the 8th century AD and doesn't start adopting the sort of the Lear elements until the 8th or 9th century. So in the 8th century, it becomes known as Legarensis Civitatis in Latin, or Legracester. And then it doesn't become Leicester until the sort of 9th century onwards. And really, Leicester doesn't get fixed until Monmouth's own time. In fact, it's entirely possible he was responsible for fixing Leicester as the spelling for Leicester, because he wrote it down. It's more likely, so when you break down Leicester's name, it means the city of Lear, or the city of the people of the Lear, is more likely to be a more accurate description. And it may even come from an Anglo-Saxon word, leger, meaning camp. So it might actually mean the camp next to the fortified Roman town. Unfortunately, it seems entirely an Anglo-Saxon topographic name. So what Monmouth is actually probably doing is he's creating an explanation for what the name means. So he's got this Leicester, the city of Lear, and he's created a character around it to justify why it has its name.
Would the people in the audience seeing King Lear performed on stage, would they have considered Monmouth's version of early Britain to be the factual historical account? Or would they have recognized it as a fictional story?
It's really tricky to answer. I suspect they would recognise it as fictional, but I mean, Monmouth's Chronicle was hugely popular. It was a bestseller of the day, right into the 17th century. There's still over 200 medieval manuscripts of it in existence today. It was that widely spread, and it was translated he wrote it in Latin. It was translated into a lot of other languages. And that's because it harks back to sort of a fictional golden age of Britain, including King Arthur. I mean, that's one of the reasons it was so popular. It's a major source for the King Arthur legend as well. He wrote it to sort of foster this single grand vision of Britain, and it's this ultimate British origin story, if you will. I mean, if you think about all the sort of the Marvel superhero films, all superheroes have origin stories. Effectively, Monmouth is writing Britain's origin story. So I don't think he set out himself to write a factually accurate story, and I don't think his audience would have accepted it as 100% true, although they wouldn't necessarily have questioned it either. But he certainly had his critics. There's other contemporary chroniclers were casting doubt on the accuracy of his story. And I mean, you've got contemporary sort of Tudor writers, Polydore Virgil as well. He's very critical of its accuracy. So there was enough critique of it at the time for people to have recognised that it wasn't necessarily true. But it was a good story, and as all good stories are, they're popular and catchy, and people sort of believe what they want to believe.
So what other archaeological sites are there associated with the King Lear legend?
Well, the Jewry Wall, Roman Baths, is the biggest one, obviously, because that's so intimately linked into Geoffrey Monmouth's story of the Lear legend. But I mean, the more we excavate in Leicester, I mean, Leicester is a modern city sitting on top of 2,000 years of archaeology. So you wander around Leicester today and you're not going to see the chocolate box British historical city like York or Canterbury or something. It is entirely Victorian and 20th century in look. So really it's more artefacts. The more we dig, the more artefacts we find that help sort of understand Monmouth's story better, I think. I mean, I really find it interesting that here is Monmouth is actually effectively writing the first archaeological discovery in Leicester when he describes the vault to Janus that King Lear is buried in, and where he's clearly describing Roman ruins. He's actually making that first archaeological observation, which I find really intriguing, because we don't really start then getting other archaeological observations until the 17th century. To antiquaries in the 17th century don't start getting an interest in the city's past. So he's quite ahead of his time in his observations, and he's trying to rationalise them as well. That's the other interesting thing. He doesn't necessarily rationalise them in the way we would rationalise them, but he's clearly trying to rationalise and explain things in townscapes that he doesn't necessarily understand, which is really intriguing. I mean, he's created this narrative around King Lear in Leicester's case.
In popular culture for 1605, around the time Shakespeare was performing King Lear, there was a widely circulated court case involving a real man named Brian Ainsley, and his daughter, Grace, tried to have him declared senile. Some historians suggest that the play, King Lear, was tied not only to Monmouth's history, but also to this specific court case in an attempt to try and tie the play into current events. Matthew, are there connections between a man whose daughter tries to get him declared senile and the legend of King Lear?
There are, to a degree. I mean, there is some weird coincidences in the late 15th and early 16th century where you do get a couple of court cases. Brian Ainsley's one of them, and there was another former mayor of Leicester, a man called Sir William Allen, if I remember rightly. Both instances, there was court cases involving them and their daughters and their inheritances. So Sir William Allen decided to divide his estates between his three daughters whilst he was still alive, with the agreement that they would look after him, and then they didn't. And then Sir Brian Ainsley, so his oldest daughter had to try to have him declared insane, and his younger daughter, who was called Cordelia, fought for her father and won the case, and prevented him from being declared insane. So there are these weird coincidences.
Yeah, I mean, that's way too specific, I think. Anyway,
absolutely,
it raises the eyebrows.
They do, and actually, they are relevant to certain parts of Shakespeare's play, because there's certain bits of the play that aren't in the original Monmouth story. And King Lear's insanity is one of them. He doesn't go insane in the original version. And the other one is the really major alteration that Shakespeare makes is he kills off Lear and Cordelia, whereas they have a happy ending in the original version. That must have been a real shock for the audience. It's that plot twist at the end, because Monmouth's work it was very widely circulated and well known, and there was already earlier plays about King Lear, at least one earlier play that has the happy ending in it. So anyone familiar with the King Lear version going to see Shakespeare's version would have been really surprised by the ending when they all died. It's definitely a plot twist moment.
Can you imagine the conversations as they're leaving the globe?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I understand it, actually it was a really unpopular ending, and for a long period after them, when it was staged, people rewrote the ending to have them staying alive at the end, right up into the 19th century. Yeah. But I mean, basically Shakespeare pulls on various sources and to write a story he wants, and obviously he's interested in certain aspects of insanity and inheritance that he wants to focus on. And so he has to be drawing on these more contemporary court cases and pulling them into the story to create his own legend effectively. I mean, of course, the King Lear version we know today, we don't actually really remember Monmouth's version. We remember Shakespeare's version where King Lear dies, and it's the whole tragedy rather than the happy ending. So yeah, it's absolutely, there is definitely this weird coincidence, parallel sort of stories going on.
I know we would love to explore the connections between archaeology, history, and the story of King Lear in Shakespeare's version and Monmouth's version. What are some of your favorite resources you can recommend we use when we want to learn more?
So if you want to know more about King Lear and Leicester's archaeology, I wrote a blog post a couple of months ago, and you can find that on newlasnews.com if you just look for the Lear of Leicester blog post on that, and you can delve more into the archaeology. There's plenty of online resources where you can actually read Monmouth's original chronicle, and the easiest way is to go on Wikipedia and find the article on the history of the Kings of Britain, his book, and go to the bottom, and there's loads of online links to the online versions, so you can read them yourself. If you want to know more about Roman Leicester, then there's another website called romanleicester.com that has loads of info, and it's a growing resource on Roman Leicester. And if you want to know more about the Jewry Wall baths, the Temple of Janus, there's jewrywallstory.gov.uk, which will tell you much more about that historical site as well.
We will link to all of these resources in the show notes for today's episode. And while it is very easy to find Matthew's article on King Lear at the website he mentioned, I will also include a direct link to that from the show notes in today's episode. So stay tuned for the link to read all of those. Now, Matthew, as you know, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those. And as you are a return guest here at That Shakespeare Life, you are allowed to choose a different desert island selection if you wish.
It's putting me on the spot there. So I mean, the obvious thing would be to obviously pick Geoffrey Monmouth's own book.
Yeah, that would be the timely selection, yes.
The very timely one, and sort of the cop-out selection. But I picked one that I think perhaps is inspired by what he was doing. So Monmouth was creating an amazing story for Britain, and I was thinking of Leicester and folklore and legends and popular stories, and a popular favourite of mine popped into my mind. So I'm going to pick Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott.
Oh, that's an excellent choice.
It's one of my favourite books of all time, but large sections of it are set in Leicestershire, and sort of it harks back to that tradition of that Monmouth started, really, I think.
Well, that's a wonderful selection. You'd be well set up on your desert island for sure. So what's next for you, Matthew? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Hopefully we've got lots of excavations coming up, and hopefully in the not so foreseeable future, we'll be back into digging big sites in Leicester again. So, and more excitingly, these are a little bit closer to the river than some of the other stuff I've done. So the closer we get to the river, the closer we get back to that Iron Age Leicester that perhaps influenced the Monmouth's Lear legend.
Exciting stuff. I do hope that you are able to return quickly and the pandemic moves on its way and allows everyone to go back to exciting things like digging up the past.
Fortunately, archaeology social distances itself by nature. It's outdoors and you're all far apart.
So you're good.
We're good, yeah.
It's built in, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mathew Morris, for being here and sharing with us the history of King Lear. This has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
To find links to the resources Mathew mentions in today's episode, where you can learn more about Geoffrey Monmouth and the real King Lear and ancient Britain, as well as the Romans and the Jewry Wall and all of the wonderful tidbits of archaeological information that is packed into the legend of King Lear and connected to Shakespeare's version of the play, find all of these things in the show notes for today's episode, along with YouTube links from the University of Leicester and other archaeological projects Mathew has been a part of. Find all these resources at CassidyCash.com/episode 133. That's CassidyCash.com/EP133. how would you like to see the video of this week's interview? You can watch this interview as well as other exclusive interviews not available anywhere else right inside That Shakespeare Life app. That's right. That Shakespeare Life is now streaming on our very own digital app. We are very excited to make this available. And not only can you stream podcast episodes anywhere you go, but the app contains exclusive content like activities, games, documentary shorts, expert interviews, and animated plays, all free from ads and available anywhere you might be. You can learn Shakespeare's history from the experts who know him best while you're in the carpool line, cooking dinner, or even while you're working out. Take Shakespeare history with you wherever you go, all without any commercials. Download the app now at CassidyCash.com/experience. That's CassidyCash.com/experience. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.